Hello, my name is Kyle Steele. I'm running for Norman City Council Ward 6, and this was the summary for the City Council Conference on Charter Amendments that happened on October 28th, 2025. For reference, since I am running for City Council, I will give my opinions on all these charters that we're about to discuss, but I'll just put it at the end, and I'll link a timestamp for that as well. So essentially, if you just want to hear my thoughts on it, you could just skip to that timestamp, because if not, I'll just cover the basic summary for everyone here. The first set of charter amendments that were discussed were about the TIFs. I already did a long form explanation on this in my TIF campaign issue video, which I'll also link below. But essentially, the discussion was on if a charter amendment, so people could vote on TIFs in addition to the city council voting, as well as changing the 5-4 vote required for a TIF on the city council to a supermajority, 6-3 or 7-2. Interestingly, what was brought up during this meeting was that under current state law, what can and can't be put to a ballot is actually spelled out, and TIF voting after the city council votes outside of a ballot initiative may not qualify. You may have to have a gist, which was kind of interesting to hear them talk about. There is a possibility that they could maybe word it in a special way so that it does comply with state law, but that's something that they have to research and would circle back on. And then with the 5-4 changing it to a supermajority, that is something that can be changed via a charter amendment and not be in violation of any state laws, because that's considered a policy level decision that's decided at a state level. So even if a charter amendment didn't pass, then you could also pass this just via an ordinance. The city council could put on themselves to make it a 6-3 or a 7-2 vote needed to pass. After the TIF charter amendments were discussed, they also re-brought up potential charter amendments around the council members' term lengths as well as their pay. These were charter amendments that were initially put to a ballot a couple years ago, and they failed for various reasons. And they're kind of bringing it back up for discussion again. Currently, if you're unaware, a council member makes $100 a month and serves a 2-year term. However, and the mayor, makes $100 a month and serves a 3-year term. They're also sworn in the July after the election. So, elections happen in February, and then a runoff happens in April, and then everyone is sworn in July. And there was talks about changing all of this. The first was bumping up a council member's term from 2 years to 3 years. The next discussion was to raise the pay rate from $100 a month to $450 a month, or $5,400 a year. And then having the mayor's pay be determined by a citizens committee, and then that committee would also review the council members' pay every couple of years and bump it or decrease it accordingly. And then there was another charter amendment to make the swear-in date the April, basically the after the runoff elections, as opposed to it being in July. And these were brought up to basically make Norman in line with what other cities of similar sizes do. There was kind of a discussion about like what a city council members in Lawton Moore make. Spoiler alert, it's not $100 a month. And there's pros and cons to all of these. The final item that was discussed was essentially continuing the street maintenance bond that's been in effect for a while. If you don't know, this is essentially a bond that pays for maintenance of the Norman streets. It's been running for quite a while now. It's been pretty successful in my opinion. However, it's set to expire soon, and so this would just be a re-upping or a continuation of that bond. And that's all that was discussed in this kind of 1-hour session before the official city council meeting. As for my opinions on all of this, the TIF votes, I've said it in my other video, I'll say it here again. I do believe that TIFs need to go to a vote of the people if it's above a certain percentage of the income that the city maintains. As for what percentage that would work out to, that's kind of like where a community discussion would need to happen. But essentially, if it comes out to the tune of around 75 to 100 million or greater, it should really go to a vote of the people. Now, if that doesn't comply with state law, that's where things get a bit more interesting, because you don't want this charter amendment or the TIF process being sued every time citizens potentially vote down a TIF. So that would have to be explored more. And then if that can't go through, I do think it needs to be a supermajority of the council. I think 7-2 is a little too much, personally. I think 6-3 would be more appropriate for a passing percentage. And I also think that if this can't be accomplished via charter amendment, the city council should take it upon itself to at least pass an ordinance to do this. And if I was elected, this would be one of the things I would push for. If a charter amendment either wasn't put on the ballot or didn't pass, and the TIF process was essentially the same as it is now, I would try to see if we could limit the city council and make that a 6-3 vote going forward. As far as the council member term length and pay, I have real mixed feelings on this. So just to start with the term length, currently it's 2 years. They're talking about maybe wanting to see if they could bump it up to 3. It's tough. So the reason why I say this is because I think 3 years does give the council members more time to kind of work their way into the role, to get things done, and not, most people only serve 1 term on a city council, 2 terms max, and this would kind of extend it, and there wouldn't be as much brain drain on the council. However, I think ultimately where I stand on this issue is it comes down to how people feel about the recall initiative. So currently in the city charter, you could recall an elected official, council member or mayor, if it's not the first 6 months of their term or the last 6 months of their term. So currently that only leaves a year in which they could be recalled, and that's a very short amount of time, and so it's very rarely used. The benefit, though, of these 2-year terms is when the city council does things that the people don't agree with, such as the TIF, in my opinion, you could vote them out and it could become an election issue relatively quickly. Whereas if it's a 3-year term, it's a potential that person might not be up for election for another 2.5 years. So if we as a community are more willing to do recall petitions on our elected officials, I think it should go up to 3 terms. However, if we as a community are saying, no, we're fine with these constant elections, we'll just treat the 2-year election cycle as a referendum on the person to begin with, then we should probably keep it at 2 years. Like I said, I'm real on the fence about this one. Council member pay is also something I'm on the fence of. Look, these council members, they put in 20 hours a week minimum. Some probably put in closer to 40 to 60, depending on what their other obligations are. At a base level, I do believe they deserve to be compensated. However, I find it hard to justify that compensation when the city budget isn't exactly in the best spot. And in theory, if we're saying, 8 council members, let's just say the mayor makes double what a council member gets, that's $54,000 a year. You could essentially hire another person to city staff for that. So would I rather be paying the entire city council, or would I rather be hiring another person to one of these city departments that desperately need it? I'd rather the money go to hire, city staff, if I can be completely honest. To be clear, I think both would deserve the money, but if you're in an either-or situation because of how the budget is, you should probably go to city staff. I think there's also an argument to be made that when people do sign up to run for city council, they basically know what they're getting into. Like when I was researching into running city council, and I was talking to other city council members about what they do kind of on the back end that you don't really see in the meetings, and got like a feel for if this is something I really want. I know what I'm getting into, and I know I'm not going to be compensated for it, because I'm motivated to do this. You know, it's a civic obligation to, you know, to pay it forward in the community. And granted, $5,400 isn't that much money, but there is an argument to make that someone might get involved to run in city council for the wrong reasons, and you know, and they may see that pay as like another reason they should run, when you know, maybe they really shouldn't, if you think about it. The flip side of that argument is, where you know, we're in tough times. You know, there's a lot of people who are economically not as well off as they need to be, and they may be passionate about local politics, but they see that doesn't, you know, make any money, and they may choose not to run because they got to worry about having a second job, essentially. You know, I think that there is worthwhile exploration of having someone on the council who, you know, makes minimum wage or works retail or food service, for example. And if instead of them getting a second job, they could become a council member if they're elected, and get compensated, and it could be worth it. I think that is also very worthwhile. So if this was a vote that was held, you know, tomorrow on council member pay, I honestly don't know how I would feel about it. Like, in theory, like, yes, I think they deserve to be compensated, and I think it would encourage some people to run for city council who normally wouldn't, good and bad. But again, I would rather it go to city staff at this point. And then finally, the street bond issue. I mean, I'm all for this. The Norman, the streets aren't perfect, but I've never really had an issue. You know, streets around me are getting repaved when they need be. You know, you'll see like maybe a pothole, you know, here and there in like the University North Park area, but it's not like I have to swerve out of the way of them. You know, you know, technically this is not a new tax, you know, if you want to look at it that way on paper. I think it's a great program. I think we should continue it. But that's just my opinion on it. You know, if you're part of a family that is struggling financially, you know, there is an argument to be made that by not voting this in, you know, your taxes will go down a little bit at the potential cost of street maintenance in our neighborhoods, and that's kind of like a personal or a household decision on if you think that's a good trade-off or not. I don't think it is for my situation, so I would vote for it. But hey, that's kind of my thoughts on the potential charter amendments that are coming up here in April, as well as what the city council talked about. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email me directly at KyleForNorman@gmail.com. You can also go to my campaign website to learn more about me, which is KyleForNorman.com. Thank you. Have a good night.